This is the title, Don't Worry, God Has Got You Covered. This began maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago when Luke and I got a phone call. Well, I got a phone call that was going to change the trajectory of where we were going considerably at this time. It wasn't like devastating or major news, but it did change the trajectory we were heading in. And so I took that phone call and I thought, okay, I'm just going to put that in your hands, God, leave it with you right now, because I can't take all that on, because it's what if this and what about them and what if this, and there was a lot of questions. So I said, okay, God, I'm just going to give this to you right now, because this leaves us in a bit of a wilderness. And I left that with God. And then a couple of days later, I was in my kitchen and I had this very unusual experience. I felt the Holy Spirit. I was probably, doing the washing up and listening to worship. That's what I usually do. And I felt the Holy Spirit come down, but I felt this big canopy. It was like a giant marquee, something like this. A great big canopy come down and fill the place, and it covered me, covered the whole place. And it wasn't just like a covering over me when I need to feel safe. It was so big. And God said, everything is going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right, Pauline. I've got you covered. And all I know was I was under this big canopy. And I left that. And within 24 hours, Luke gave me a book. And it was Surviving Your Wilderness. He knew nothing about this. I hadn't shared it with anybody. But I'd wrote it in my journal. God has me covered with this canopy. And the third chapter in, I opened it at this page, and it said about the canopy of God. And what is the canopy of God? It appears in the wilderness. It's his covering, and it's to protect us, but it's to save us from attacks of the enemy as well, when we don't know what's going on, when we're in this wilderness state. And what it really is the glory of God. And I was like, yes. And God spoke this word, 2 Corinthians 12. My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And I would rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And the translation of that, it's like a tent, it's like a canopy that comes and rests on us. It's God's strength. When we're weak, in our utter weakness, God's strength comes upon us like this tent, and it rests upon us. It actually rests in us, it says. It's like the tabernacle in the wilderness. God's tent comes and rests in us in our weakest moments. And God was saying, Pauline, I don't actually need your strength right now. I need your weakness, because that's when God's glory comes in our weakness. We went to, as you know, the mission field. We went to Cambodia a few decades ago now, and it was in a quite a dangerous time we went. It had just literally just opened its doors, so people didn't know what they were going to find there. And I just went. I was in my late 30s, and I went strong. If you knew me, I went from a church setting. I was strong physically, I was strong emotionally, and I was strong spiritually. And I was going to go and change their world for them. I was going to go and, we're going to see God transform this nation that's been torn down. And I went in such strength. I came back in 100% weakness. I came back in such weakness. It broke me in every way. My health and my emotions, my spirit was completely broken when I came back. And I didn't reach all the people I wanted to reach. I didn't see the change I wanted to see there. And I had prayed and fasted for that country for years before I went there, every single day. I couldn't understand why my strength didn't bring about more change there. But I came back in weakness, thinking everything was over, because it took me 2 years to recover from the illness that I contracted there. But God did more in those 2 years and onwards in my weakness than he had in all the years in my strength beforehand. That weakness opened the door for me to bless so many more people. God opened to me this whole nation. I suddenly was thrust into a ministry, a nationwide, that I'd never been in. And it was not this time in my strength, it was in my utter weakness. God's like, I don't need your strength, thanks, Pauline. You seem to be, when you're strong, you seem to be able to do it without me. I need your weakness, because then you lean on me, you depend on me 100%. And that's what God needs. Do you know, so many of our ministries are birthed out of weakness. I can tell you, City Lights was probably birthed out of the weakest moment in Luke's life that I know of. And it always will be that. It will always be this. That's why Paul said, I celebrate my weakness. I glory in it, because I know who's going to get the glory from this. I was strong before. I did everything in my own strength. And where did it get me? Not very far. But he said, as soon as I understood weakness and I walked in that weakness, God got the glory, and God brought about a worldwide purpose through Paul. You see, he was trying to do everything in his own strength. Do not despise weakness in your life. Do not despise any place of weakness that you feel like, I can't offer this to God. I can't do this for God because of this. God will take that very thing that's weak in you and will use it for his glory and multiply it. That's the extraordinary thing about God. And the wonderful thing, because at the end of the day, people look at you and they say, well, I know it can't be you, so it has to be God. It was interesting last night. I was at a meeting and a young girl, a young woman in her 20s came to me and asked at the end and asked if I would pray for her. And I was like, yes. And I was thinking it was going to be. I knew her, vivacious young lady, and got a heart for God, precious daughter of God. And I thought, I know she's doing exams and things. I thought she'll want a prayer for exams or something. And I said, what would you like prayer for? And she said, I want to change the world. I want to reach my generation. All of them. I was like, okay then. So nothing big, just, it wasn't a small prayer. It was like, okay, I did not see this coming. And I looked at her and I started to pray, say, God, how do I pray? When suddenly the Holy Spirit just came upon me and I felt the heart of God, the heart of love for this girl, because I could see myself at her age. And I could see the same prayer and the same desire and the same cry to God. And I was strong and I was vivacious, if you knew me, and I was always excited about life. I had no idea God was going to answer my prayer through the brokenness, through the broken times. I thought I was just going to go from strength to strength, and God was going to use me to save many people and win the world. And as I went to pray for her, the Spirit of God, that Spirit of light, his brokenness, yes, I'm going to answer this young woman's prayer, but not in the way that she thinks. There's going to come out of brokenness, not out of strength. And I prayed for her to allow God, whatever he wanted to do in her life, to trust him, to allow him to do that. Because I said, when it doesn't look like it's the time or the place God can use you, will be the very place and the time. And my heart broke because I could see God answering her prayer, but maybe not the way she or I or even yourselves thought he would. It always comes differently. And I came home and I put my phone on to look up something, and a poster came up from a minister in America, a well-known one, and it was just this big poster, and it said, the blessing is in the breaking. The blessing is in the breaking. It's exactly what I'd prayed over her. I don't think I've ever prayed this over anybody. My heart hasn't felt that sort of God's heart like that sort of, yes, I'm going to, but it will be in the breaking. I prayed that, and I texted it to her this morning and said, you'll never believe this. This poster has come up with the words that God gave me for you. The blessing is in the breaking. So don't despise your weakness. Don't despise these days when you think, how can God use me? I've got to care for these, children at home. I'm caring for maybe somebody who you are a carer for somebody else, or you're responsible, or you've got dependents, or maybe your job, doesn't entitle you to go on mission or anything else. Don't despise the times when you think, I can't because of this, because it's those very things that God uses so often. If our hearts are willing, and if our hearts allow the brokenness, all I know is I've been broken, but I've allowed God to heal it. I've tried not to get bitter. I've tried not to dwell on it. I've not tried to give it to God to heal. I don't believe time heals. I believe only God heals. But time makes it obviously dimmer. But I believe God heals, and I've allowed God to heal every broken place, and He's been able to use that. A few years ago, I broke my arm badly. When I went, I said, it's still hurting soon after the operation. And the therapist said, no, it's not your bones hurting. They will heal strong. They'll heal stronger than before. It's just the sensitive nerves and tendons around that area that you think it's your bone, but it isn't. And they said, your bone's really hard. And I've allowed God to heal those broken areas to make it stronger. Let Him use your brokenness. Let Him use your weakness. Let Him use those places that you think, oh, if I didn't have this, I could do this. Or if I didn't have this personality, I could do that. Let Him use that to bring glory to Himself. That's all I know of Christianity. I don't know of any other way God has used me. When I felt the strongest hasn't been when God's used me to the max. It's been when I've gone in brokenness to a meeting, when I've gone in my weakness. God always moves. But when I felt strong, yeah, God, come on, let's do this, it hasn't been the same impact. So I know that God gets the glory from our weakness. Whatever hits you today or in the coming days, for those of you who have shared you're in the wilderness, there is a canopy, there's a covering. It's to cover you while you're in that place. And again, you'll come out of the wilderness like Jesus did in the glory of God. Because that covering, that glory will be covering you in the wilderness. And when you come out of there, the glory is going to be on you like it was on Jesus. And get ready, because whenever you come out of your wilderness, God does something amazing that you never saw coming. So I'd like...
Come on, power coming down from the Father. Holy Spirit, this is your hour. Jesus, we lift you higher and higher until you become our only desire. We need you to come and fill us with fire. We're hungry for more of your power.